Inflation hit a 40-year record high in March, with consumer prices rising 8.5% from a year ago. The latest figures from the Labor Department show the Consumer Price Index jumped 1.2% after increasing 0.8% in February. Core inflation, which strips out volatile food and energy costs, rose 6.5% from a year ago. Nearly half the latest increase in inflation comes from the rising cost of gas, which climbed 18% in March. For more, let's bring in Nancy Cortez at the White House. Of course, she is our CBS News chief White House correspondent. Nancy, it's great to see you. Our recent CBS News poll shows the economy as the top issue on most Americans' minds. Just behind that, we have inflation, then crime, and then the war in Ukraine was a distant fourth. How do you think these concerns are lining up with what we're seeing from the administration and the events they're having, the messages that they're trying to send, and really making a priority for people?
Well, there's no question that the White House is well aware that the economy and the inflation that we've been seeing are top of mind for most Americans. But the challenge for this White House and any White House is that you don't always get to choose your priorities. And clearly, there's a huge and heavy focus right now on what's going on in Ukraine. But the president still made the trip halfway across the country today to Iowa to announce one small measure that he can take to try to bring gas prices down a little bit, and that is by asking the EPA for a waiver that will allow the production of this gasoline blend called E15. It's got more ethanol in it than a typical gasoline blend, and that brings the price down by about 10 cents. The catch is, however, that it only brings the price down in parts of the country where that gasoline is sold, about 2,300 gas stations in the South and Midwest primarily. So it's unlikely to make a dent in gas prices for most Americans. All you have to do is look at this new report from the Labor Department to see how much prices, not just for gasoline, but for all kinds of things, have skyrocketed over the past year. Yes, gas is up 48%, but fuel oil is up 70%, groceries up 10%, even housing up 5%. And, anyone who's filled up their tank or gone to the supermarket in the past month or so is well aware that these prices are still climbing.
And I remember when we talked this morning, because we talk all the time, all day long, you made a really important point that the president is very clear about who's to blame for this, right? I mean, initially he was saying it was the Putin gas hike, the Putin gas tax. But that has clearly shifted, especially after this report came out that showed the price of everything, as you just mentioned, is soaring.
Right. I mean, there's no question that both of these things can be true, that prices can have risen over the past month when it comes to fuel as a result of the war in Ukraine that led to countries around the world scrambling to find other sources of oil than Russia. At the same time, the White House acknowledges that these prices were already on the rise well before the war started as a result of the pandemic and supply chain challenges. The big problem for the White House is that their tool belt, as you know so well, Weija, it isn't that large. They can do things like the president is doing today to kind of nibble around the margins. They can try to tackle the supply chain issues by bringing the various parties together. But the reality is that the White House just doesn't have that many levers it can pull. They're really looking towards the Federal Reserve, which is already on the path to raise interest rates several times this year. So on one hand, they want to show that they are focused on this issue. On the other hand, they don't want to overpromise, because the reality is that there isn't that much the White House can do.
Right. And because of that, I mean, this report didn't really come as a surprise. In fact, during yesterday's White House briefing, Jen Psaki told you guys, that they were anticipating these numbers. Did they have any kind of plan to get ahead of it, to sort of explain to Americans why these figures are so high and what they're doing to try to combat them?
Yeah, it was really notable. Jen Psaki basically came right out and said, it's going to be bad. We know it's going to be bad. It was no surprise. Gas prices, everyone, can look at the numbers ticking up. They went up 18% in March. They actually have been falling a little bit since then, but they're still over $4 a gallon. They're still plenty high. And the White House didn't see a need or really even an advantage to sugarcoating it. And it's no accident that the president, on the day these numbers dropped, already had this trip planned to Iowa so that they could make it clear they're trying to tackle it. And, you're right when it comes to the messaging, Weija. In almost every speech, President Biden has been labeling it the Putin price hike, the Putin price hike. In Iowa today, he even went as far as to say that the people over here shouldn't be suffering with high gas prices just because someone is committing genocide half a world away. The first time that he has used that term genocide up until now, he's really been trying to steer clear, and so have various other officials in the administration, including Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor. So both looking to alleviate some of the pain on the inflation front, but also perhaps create some news in other areas, appears to be the playbook for the White House today.
For sure. And you kind of already talked about this, but you laid out how the president's announcement today doesn't really mean lower gas prices for everybody. Did he explain that? Did he talk about why he was still making this announcement, even though it will only have an impact for a fraction of American consumers?
Sure. I mean, this was something that he was being pushed to do by Democrats and Republicans alike, particularly lawmakers from states like Iowa that produce a lot of ethanol. Typically, the production of E15, this gasoline blend that uses 15% ethanol, isn't allowed to be distributed in the summer months because it's believed that it contributes to smog. And so there's an EPA rule that prevents that. But the step that he's taking to basically waive that rule is, just another piece of the puzzle. Even before he made this announcement, he announced that he was going to be allowing the release of 1 million barrels of gasoline, of oil rather, a day from the strategic petroleum reserves. Another move to try to alleviate the sudden supply crunch that we are experiencing, in particular as a result of the war in Ukraine. But I was talking to an energy analyst just today who said, even without the war in Ukraine, we were already seeing a big supply crunch when it comes to oil being produced around the world. And typically in those situations, you would anticipate that oil-producing nations like Saudi Arabia would step up and produce more, but they've been unwilling to do so up until this point because of the relationship that they have with Russia.
Yeah, it is a really tricky, costly puzzle, and they are going to use any piece, big or small, that they can. Nancy, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Weija.